The construction site on Kepler 442b hummed with activity as dozens of alien species worked together to build the new Galactic Trade Center. Massive cranes lifted steel beams into place, while hover platforms carried supplies between the towering skeletal structures. The planet's twin suns cast long shadows across the red soil, and the air shimmered with heat despite the advanced climate control systems. Zarathek stood at the edge of the construction zone, her scaled purple skin gleaming in the sunlight. As a member of the proud Velthari species, she commanded respect wherever she went. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, with razor-sharp claws and muscles that could crush steel, the Velthari were known throughout the galaxy as one of the most physically powerful races. Their homeworld was a death trap of massive predators and extreme gravity, which had forged them into natural warriors and leaders. She watched the construction with growing irritation. The project was behind schedule, and the other alien foremen seemed incapable of motivating their crews. The Zephyrian supervisors kept stopping to discuss every minor detail in their musical language. The crystalline Mordak workers moved with precision, but at a glacial pace. Even the insectoid Hivrak, usually efficient, appeared sluggish in the planet's heat. "This is pathetic," Zarathek muttered to her companion, Krixtal, another Velthari warrior. "At this rate, the trade center won't be finished for another 3 cycles. The Galactic Council will blame all of us for the delays." Krixtal nodded, his own purple scales darkening with frustration. "Perhaps we should take control. The other species clearly lack the strength and leadership necessary for such an important project." That's when they noticed him. A lone figure walked between the construction crews, stopping to speak with different workers. He was small compared to most species present, standing maybe 6 feet tall with pale pink skin and strange fur on the top of his head. His clothes were simple work gear, nothing fancy or decorated. But what caught Zarathek's attention was how the other workers responded to him. Wherever this creature went, productivity seemed to increase. The Zephyrians stopped their endless discussions and got back to work. The Mordak picked up their pace noticeably. Even Hivrak drones began moving with renewed purpose. Workers who had been standing around suddenly found tasks to complete. "What species is that?" Krixtal asked, squinting at the strange biped. Zarathek accessed her datapad, scanning through the worker roster. "According to this, it's a human from a planet called Earth. Says here he's the construction foreman for this section." Both Velthari burst into laughter. "A human." Zarathek could barely contain her amusement. "I've heard of them. They're from some backward planet in the Outer Rim. Weak gravity, no natural predators worth mentioning. They only recently achieved space travel. And they made one of them a foreman?" Krixtal shook his head in disbelief. "Look at him. He's barely larger than a Zephyrian hatchling. I could snap him in half with one claw." Zarathek studied the human more carefully. His name tag read Jake Morrison in standard galactic script. He appeared to be middle-aged by human standards, with weathered hands and small scars that spoke of years of manual labor. Nothing about him seemed impressive or noteworthy. "This is exactly what's wrong with the galaxy today," she declared loudly, making sure her voice carried across the construction site. "Political correctness has gone too far when we're putting primitive weaklings in charge of major projects." Several nearby workers turned to look, including a group of Zephyrians and some Mordak engineers. Zarathek felt encouraged by the attention and decided to make her point more forcefully. "I mean, seriously, look at this creature," she continued, gesturing toward Jake Morrison, who was now examining some blueprints with a Hivrak supervisor. "What could a human possibly know about real construction work? On my homeworld, weaklings like that would be eaten by ground crawlers before their first molting." The human looked up from his blueprints. For a moment, their eyes met across the construction site. Zarathek felt a strange sensation, as if those small brown eyes were measuring her in some way. Then, Jake simply nodded politely and returned to his work. This mild reaction only infuriated Zarathek more. "Did you see that?" she demanded. "No challenge, no defensive posturing, nothing. Where I come from, Such disrespect would mean instant combat. Maybe he didn't hear you, suggested Crixtal, though he sounded doubtful. Oh, he heard me all right. Zarathek's voice rose another notch. These soft-worlders have no spine. No wonder their species was unknown until recently. They probably spent most of their evolution hiding in caves from anything dangerous. A small crowd was gathering now. Word spread quickly through the construction site that one of the Veltheri supervisors was making a scene. Workers from different species found excuses to drift closer, pretending to check equipment or discuss project details while actually listening to Zarathek's tirade. The Galactic Council must have lost their minds, she declared. Putting a human in charge of anything important is like giving a laser rifle to a juvenile. They simply don't have the capacity to handle real responsibility. She was warming up now, enjoying the audience and the feeling of superiority. I've studied their homeworld. Earth has gravity so weak that even their largest predators are smaller than my pet Grokvark. Their entire planet is basically a nursery compared to real worlds where real species evolved. Jake Morrison finished his discussion with the Hiverax supervisor and began walking in their direction. Zarathek felt a moment of anticipation. Finally, the weak little human would try to defend himself, and she would have the pleasure of putting him in his place in front of everyone. But as Jake approached, his expression remained calm and professional. No anger, no defensiveness, not even curiosity about why a Veltheri warrior was shouting about him across the construction site. "Excuse me," Jake said politely when he reached them, his voice carrying a slight accent that Zarathek couldn't identify. "I'm Jake Morrison, the foreman for sections 7 through 12. I don't think we've been introduced." Zarathek stared down at him from her considerable height. Up close, the human seemed even smaller and more fragile. His skin looked soft, almost delicate compared to her armored scales. His hands, while calloused from work, had small, blunt fingers instead of proper claws. Most ridiculous of all, he had hair growing from his face in a short, neat arrangement that served no obvious protective purpose. "I am Zarathek of the Veltheri warrior caste," she announced formally. "And I was just explaining to these workers why putting a human in charge of anything is a mistake." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I see. Well, I appreciate your concern about the project's success. Is there a specific issue with the construction quality in my sections that you'd like to discuss?" The reasonable response caught Zarathek off guard. She had expected defensiveness, anger, or at least some kind of emotional reaction. This calm professionalism was somehow more irritating than outright hostility would have been. "The issue," she said through gritted teeth, "is that humans are physically and mentally inferior to every other sapient species. Your kind has no business supervising real workers." "That's an interesting perspective," Jake replied evenly. "Have you had a chance to review our progress reports? Section 7 finished ahead of schedule yesterday, and we've maintained 0 safety violations for the past 6 weeks. Anyone can manipulate data," Zarathek waved dismissively. "The real question is whether you have the strength to do actual work instead of just standing around with clipboards." A murmur ran through the growing crowd of onlookers. Several species that considered physical prowess important were nodding in agreement. The Veltheri had a point, they seemed to think. Physical strength was fundamental to good leadership in dangerous jobs like construction. Jake glanced around to the watching workers, then back at Zarathek. "I understand your concerns. Physical capability is certainly important in construction work. Did you have something specific in mind?" Zarathek's predatory smile revealed teeth like daggers. Finally, the weak human was going to embarrass himself in front of everyone. This would be a valuable lesson for the Galactic Council about proper species placement in important jobs. "As a matter of fact, I do," she purred. "My transport pod is parked over there with a load of titanium steel support beams. Each beam weighs approximately 800 kilograms. If you're truly capable of doing real construction work, you should be able to move them manually." She gestured toward a hover platform loaded with massive metal beams. Even with the planet's reduced gravity compared to the Veltheri homeworld, those beams would be a significant challenge for most species. For a human from a weak gravity world, they should be completely impossible to move without mechanical assistance. 800 kilograms, Jake repeated thoughtfully. That's about 1,700 pounds in Earth measurements. Yeah, that's pretty heavy. Too heavy for you, obviously, Zarathek said with satisfaction. Perhaps you should stick to paperwork and leave the real work to species that actually evolved for it. The crowd was getting larger now. Word had spread that there was about to be a physical challenge between a Velthari warrior and the human foreman. Workers were abandoning their posts to witness what everyone assumed would be a humiliating demonstration of human weakness. Jake walked over to the hover platform and examined the titanium steel beams. They were indeed massive, each one roughly 3 meters long and thick as a tree trunk. The metal gleamed dully in the twin sun's light, and the platform's anti-gravity generators hummed with effort to keep the load stable. You know, Jake said conversationally, running his hand along one of the beams, these are really well made. The molecular bonding on this titanium steel composite is impressive. Much better than the stuff we used to get back on Earth. Zarathek felt increasingly confident. The human was obviously stalling, trying to find an excuse to back down without losing too much face. Soon he would admit his limitations, and she would have proven her point about species hierarchy. Stop wasting everyone's time, she called out. Either move the beam or admit that humans don't belong in positions of authority. Jake nodded and positioned himself at one end of the nearest beam. The crowd fell silent, watching intently. Even the Velthari workers had stopped what they were doing to observe. This was going to be the entertainment highlight of their shift. The human bent down and wrapped his arms around the massive beam. Zarathek could see his muscles tensing through his work shirt. For a moment, nothing happened. The beam remained solidly in place, as everyone expected. Then, Jake straightened up. The 800-kilogram titanium steel beam came with him. A collective gasp went up from the watching crowd. The human was holding the massive piece of construction material, like it was made of lightweight plastic. His face showed concentration, but no obvious strain. His breathing remained normal and controlled. Where would you like me to put this? Jake asked politely. Zarathek stared in shock. That was impossible. Completely impossible. Humans were weak gravity weaklings. Everyone knew that. The beam should have been far too heavy for any creature from Earth to even budge, let alone lift completely off the platform. That can't be right, she stammered. The gravity here is wrong, or the beam is hollow, or... Jake walked over and gently set the beam down in a nearby storage area. The ground shook slightly when the massive piece of metal made contact, confirming its substantial weight. Then he returned to the platform and positioned himself next to the second beam. This one too? He asked helpfully. Without waiting for an answer, Jake lifted the second beam as easily as the first. Then the third. Then the fourth. In less than 5 minutes, he had single-handedly moved the entire load of titanium steel support beams that would normally require a mechanical lifter or a team of strong workers. When he finished, Jake wiped his hands on a small towel and walked back to where Zarathek stood frozen in disbelief. Anything else you'd like me to move? He asked with the same polite professionalism he'd shown throughout the entire demonstration. The construction site had gone completely silent. Hundreds of workers from dozens of species stared at the human foreman with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. The Velthari, supposedly one of the strongest species in the galaxy, had just been casually outperformed by a creature they considered a weakling. Ow! Zarathek whispered. Jake shrugged. Earth gravity is about twice what it is here on Kepler 442b. Plus, I've been doing construction work for 20 years. You develop certain techniques. He started to walk away, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Zarathek, when you said humans are physically inferior to every other sapient species, you might want to double-check that assumption. We're still discovering what we're capable of out here among the stars. As Jake Morrison returned to his work, the construction site slowly came back to life. But everything had changed. Workers who had previously dismissed the human foreman now watched him with new respect and curiosity. The Zephyrians began incorporating some of his suggested workflow improvements. The Mordak engineers started asking his opinion on structural modifications. And Zarathek stood in the middle of it all, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Everything she thought she knew about humans, about strength, about the natural order of species in the galaxy, had just been casually demolished by a soft-spoken construction worker from a planet most people had never heard of. But this was only the beginning. Word of what had happened on Kepler 442b was already starting to spread through galactic communication networks. Soon, beings across the galaxy would be asking the same question that Zarathek was asking herself. What else could humans do that no one expected? The twin suns continued their arc across the alien sky, and construction on the Galactic Trade Center resumed its steady pace. But something fundamental had shifted. The human foreman continued his quiet, efficient work, completely unaware that he had just changed how an entire galaxy thought about his species. And, in the distance, Zarathek's personal transport pod sat empty except for one passenger, her pet dragon. 3 days after the beam-lifting incident, Zarathek found herself unable to concentrate on anything else. She had filed report after report with the Velthari High Command, trying to explain what she had witnessed. Each time, her superiors responded with skepticism and requests for video evidence, which unfortunately didn't exist since no one had expected anything noteworthy to happen. "You must be mistaken," Commander Velcrone had told her during their latest communication. "Humans are registered as Class 7 physical specimens. Their maximum documented lift capacity is less than 200 kilograms under optimal conditions. What you're describing would require Class 2 strength, which is impossible for their species." But Zarathek knew what she had seen. The human Jake Morrison had moved those beams like they were children's toys. More disturbing was how he had done it with such casual ease, as if 800-kilogram loads were nothing unusual in his daily routine. She decided to investigate further. The Galactic Database contained surprisingly little information about humans beyond basic physiological data and their recent contact with the Galactic Council. Their homeworld, Earth, was listed as a medium-gravity planet with diverse climates and no species-threatening predators. The humans themselves were described as bipedal omnivores with above-average intelligence, but unremarkable physical capabilities. None of it explained what she had witnessed. Zarathek made her way across the construction site towards Section 7, where Jake Morrison's crews were working on the Trade Center's foundation supports. As she walked, she noticed something she hadn't paid attention to before. The humans' work areas consistently showed signs of exceptional productivity. Where other sections had crews of 8 to 12 workers handling heavy equipment, Jake's teams seemed to operate with smaller numbers, but somehow accomplish more. Massive concrete forms that should have required hover cranes were being positioned by hand. Steel reinforcement bars that normally needed mechanical benders were shaped with simple tools. And always quietly directing the work with calm efficiency was the human foreman. "Zarathek," a familiar voice called out. She turned to see Mordax, a crystalline engineer from the 7th Resonance. His translucent body pulsed with nervous energy, and his harmonic voice carried undertones of confusion. "I heard about your encounter with the human Morrison," Mordax chimed, his crystal structure shifting colors to indicate distress. "I've been observing his work methods, and I cannot reconcile what I observe with known human capabilities." "What have you seen?" Zarathek asked, grateful to find someone else who was questioning the accepted wisdom about human limitations. Mordax's form flickered through several color phases before settling on a deep blue, indicating serious concern. Yesterday, Morrison's crew was installing the primary load-bearing columns for Section 7. Standard procedure requires a coordinated lift using 3 hover cranes, with backup systems and safety protocols. And Morrison disconnected the cranes and lifted the columns by himself. Each column weighs nearly 2 tons and extends 40 meters in length. I witnessed him carry them across the construction site and position them with millimeter precision. Zarathek felt her scales tingling with tension. 2 tons. That was impossible. Even the strongest Veltheri warriors, products of high-gravity evolution and centuries of martial conditioning, couldn't lift 2 tons unassisted. "There must be an explanation," she muttered. "Hidden mechanical assistance, gravity manipulation, something." "I thought so as well." Mordax harmonized sadly. "I scanned the area with full-spectrum analysis. No mechanical aids, no energy fields, no technological enhancement of any kind. Just the human Morrison lifting construction materials that should be impossible for his species to move." Together, they approached Section 7. Jake Morrison was currently working with a team of Hiverack drones, installing massive steel trusses that would support the trade center's upper levels. The Hiverack were impressive workers, their insectoid forms perfectly adapted for construction tasks, with multiple arms and natural coordination that made them ideal for complex assembly work. But they were struggling with the current task. "The angle is incorrect," Buzz Clicktor, the lead Hiverack supervisor. His translator rendered his chemical communications into galactic standard. "The truss weight distribution exceeds our carrying capacity at this elevation." Jake Morrison looked up at the partially installed truss, a massive steel framework that stretched 30 meters across the construction area. Even with the Hiverack's four-armed lifting capability, the weight and awkward angle made proper positioning nearly impossible. "No problem," Jake said calmly. "Let me give you a hand." Before anyone could protest, the human foreman climbed up the temporary scaffolding to where the Hiverack workers were struggling with the truss. The steel framework had to weigh at least 1,500 kilograms, and its current position made leverage nearly impossible. Jake positioned himself at the truss's center point and simply lifted. The massive steel framework rose smoothly into position, guided by Jake's steady hands while the Hiverack workers scrambled to secure the connection points. What should have been an hour-long operation requiring additional equipment was completed in minutes. "Securing bolts engaged," reported Clicktor, his voice carrying undertones of amazement that his translator couldn't quite capture. "Structural integrity optimal. Installation complete." Jake climbed down from the scaffolding and dusted off his hands. "Thanks for the help, everyone. The next truss should be easier now that we have the first one in place as a reference point." The Hiverack workers clustered together, their antennae twitching in rapid communication that didn't require translation. They were as confused as everyone else who witnessed Jake Morrison's impossible physical capabilities. Zarathek approached the human foreman directly. She had to know the truth. "Morrison," she called out, "I need to speak with you." Jake turned toward her with the same calm expression he always seemed to wear. "Sure. What can I do for you?" 3 days ago, you lifted 800-kilogram beams like they were made of plastic. Today, you just positioned a 1,500-kilogram steel truss by yourself. I need to understand how this is possible." Jake considered her question seriously. "Well, the beams weren't that challenging because I could get a good grip and the load was balanced. The truss was trickier because of the awkward positioning, but the Hiverack workers did most of the actual securing work." "That's not what I mean," Zarathek pressed. "According to every database in the galaxy, humans are physically weak. Your species evolved on a soft world with minimal challenges. How can you lift loads that would challenge the strongest warriors from high-gravity death worlds?" "Ah," Jake nodded in understanding. "I think there's been a misunderstanding about Earth's environment." He gestured toward a nearby supply crate and sat down, indicating that Zarathek should join him. Despite her better judgment, she found herself sitting beside the human, her massive frame dwarfing his smaller form. "The galactic databases aren't wrong about Earth having diverse climates and no single dominant predator," Jake began. "But I think whoever compiled that information missed some important details. Such as, well, for starters, Earth doesn't have one ecosystem. We have thousands. Deserts where the temperature reaches 70 degrees Celsius, polar regions that drop to -50, mountain ranges with air so thin that most species would suffocate, ocean trenches with pressure that would crush a battleship." Jake paused to take a drink from his water bottle before continuing. "Humans didn't evolve to dominate one specific environment. We evolved to survive in all of them. We're not specialized for anything in particular, which means we're adaptable to almost everything. Zarathek frowned. Adaptability doesn't explain your strength, doesn't it? Jake smiled slightly. The gravity on Earth is about twice what it is here on Kepler, 442b, but that's just the baseline. I grew up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado, where the elevation meant even less oxygen than normal. My father was a construction worker, just like me, and he started taking me to work sites when I was 12 years old. He held up his hands, and Zarathek could see the scars and calluses that covered his palms and fingers. 20 years of construction work in double gravity, carrying tools and materials up mountainsides, working in conditions that would challenge most species. I guess it adds up, but the databases were compiled by the First Contact team, who probably met humans from the diplomatic corps or academic institutions. People who spent their time in climate-controlled offices, not doing manual labor. Jake stood up and stretched, his joints making small popping sounds that somehow seemed ominous rather than insignificant. The thing is, Zarathek, humans aren't particularly special in any single area. We're not the strongest, or the fastest, or the smartest, or the most adaptable. But we're pretty good at all of those things, and we're really good at not giving up when things get difficult. Before Zarathek could respond, a commotion erupted from across the construction site. Shouts and alarm calls echoed between the building frameworks, and workers were running in panic from something near the transport landing area. "What's happening?" Jake asked a passing Zephyrian worker. The bird-like alien's feathers were ruffled with fear. "Something's escaped from one of the personal transports. The safety teams are trying to contain it, but it's too aggressive." Zarathek felt her blood run cold. She had a horrible suspicion about which transport and what might have escaped from it. "Oh no," she whispered. "Whiskers." "Whiskers?" Jake asked. My companion. Alveltori hunting Drake. I brought him along for emotional support during the long construction assignment." They hurried toward the commotion, joining a crowd of workers who were maintaining a safe distance from something that was clearly causing considerable alarm. Through the crowd, Zarathek could see security teams setting up containment barriers while evacuation crews guided non-essential personnel away from the area. And in the center of the disturbance, she saw him. Whiskers was a magnificent specimen of Veltheri hunting drake, standing nearly 4 meters tall at the shoulder with midnight black scales that rippled with muscle underneath. His head was the size of a hover car, filled with teeth like titanium daggers, and his eyes glowed with predatory intelligence. Massive wings spread from his back, each one capable of generating hurricane-force winds. Right now, Whiskers was absolutely furious. The drake paced back and forth within the hastily erected containment barriers, roaring challenges that shook the ground and made nearby equipment vibrate. His claws left deep gouges in the reinforced ground plating, and his tail thrashed with enough force to dent steel. "How'd he get out?" Zarathek demanded. "Unknown," replied Captain Thexlar of the site security team, a four-armed Craxi officer whose natural armor was scarred from years of dangerous duty. "The transport pod's containment field is still active, but the creature somehow bypassed all safety protocols." Zarathek studied the situation. Whiskers had somehow escaped from her supposedly escape-proof transport pod and was now terrifying everyone on the construction site. The drake's emotional state seemed to be deteriorating rapidly, and she could see signs that he was preparing to become truly violent rather than simply agitated. "We need tranquilizer weapons," Captain Thexlar continued. "Military-grade sedatives powerful enough to bring down a creature that size without causing permanent harm. Those will take at least an hour to arrive from the orbital station," another security officer reported. "And we're not certain they'll be effective against Veltheri biology anyway." Whiskers let out another ear-splitting roar and began testing the containment barriers more aggressively. The energy fields sparked and fluctuated under the assault from his claws and teeth. "The barriers won't hold much longer," Captain Thexlar announced grimly. "We need to evacuate the entire construction site." "Wait," Jake Morrison said quietly. "Before we give up on containment, Let me try something. The security captain turned to look at the human foreman with disbelief. Sir, with respect, that's a Veltheri hunting drake. Adult male, probably weighing close to 3 tons. They're capable of taking down starship landing craft. I understand that, Jake replied calmly. But panicking him further isn't going to make the situation better. Sometimes a direct approach works better than elaborate plans. Before anyone could stop him, Jake Morrison walked toward the containment barriers. Morrison, stop, Zarathek called out in alarm. Whiskers is trained to hunt. If he sees you as prey or a threat, he'll attack instantly. But Jake was already at the barrier controls. With practiced efficiency, he deactivated a section of the containment field and stepped through. Whiskers immediately focused on the small human who had entered his territory. The drake's massive head swung around, and those glowing eyes fixed on Jake with predatory intensity. A low growl rumbled from the creature's throat, a sound like distant thunder that made the ground vibrate. The entire construction site fell silent. Hundreds of workers watched in horrified fascination as the human foreman faced down one of the galaxy's most dangerous predators with nothing but his work clothes and calm expression. Jake Morrison looked up at the 3-ton hunting drake and nodded politely. Hello there, big guy, he said in the same conversational tone he used for discussing construction schedules. You seem upset about something. Whiskers tilted his massive head, apparently confused by this reaction. Most creatures either fled in terror or attacked aggressively when confronted by a Veltheri drake. They didn't casually start conversations. Jake took a step closer. I'm guessing you got out of your transport pod, and now you're not sure where you are or how to get back home. That's got to be frustrating. Another step closer. Whiskers could have reached out and bitten Jake in half without even stretching his neck fully, but something about the human's calm demeanor seemed to be having an effect. The drake's growling subsided to a low rumble. The thing is, Jake continued, now close enough to touch the massive creature. Everyone here is pretty scared of you right now. And when people are scared, they sometimes make bad decisions. I'd rather not let that happen. Jake reached out slowly and placed his hand on Whisker's snout. The drake went completely still. For a moment, nothing happened. Human and drake regarded each other in silence, while hundreds of alien workers held their breath. Then, incredibly, Whiskers began making a sound that Zarathek recognized as contentment, a deep, rumbling purr that indicated relaxation and pleasure. That's better, Jake said softly, scratching behind one of the drake's massive ear ridges. You're really a beautiful creature, aren't you? I bet you're missing home. He turned to address the watching crowd without removing his hand from Whiskers. Could someone open up the transport pod again? I think our friend here just wants to go back to familiar territory. Captain Thexlar scrambled to comply, remotely activating Zarathek's transport pod. The containment field flickered back online, and the comfortable interior lighting indicated that the space was ready for occupation. Jake gave Whiskers one more scratch behind the ears. Come on, big guy. Let's get you home. To everyone's amazement, the massive hunting drake obediently followed the human foreman across the construction site and back into the transport pod. Whiskers settled into his usual resting position and closed his eyes, apparently ready for a nap. Jake closed the pod's access hatch and returned to where the security teams were still standing in shock. Problem solved, he announced simply. Captain Thexlar stared at him. How did you do that? Veltheri hunting drakes are apex predators. They don't respond to non-Veltheri life forms except as prey or threats. Jake shrugged. Animals are animals. They respond to confidence and calm energy more than they do to fear or aggression. Besides, he wasn't really angry, just confused and defensive. Zarathek approached slowly, her mind reeling from what she had just witnessed. Not only had this human physically restrained her 3-ton companion creature with gentle touches, but he had somehow communicated with Whiskers in a way that even she sometimes struggled to achieve. Morrison, she said carefully, Whiskers is a trained war drake. He's been conditioned since hatching to respond only to Veltheri handlers. What you just did shouldn't be possible. Jake looked at her with those calm brown eyes that seemed to see more than they revealed. Maybe the problem isn't what I can do, he said thoughtfully. Maybe the problem is what everyone assumes I can't do. As the construction site slowly returned to normal activity, word of the incident began spreading through galactic communication networks. Within hours, the story would reach military commanders, xenobiologists, and government officials across dozens of star systems. A human had casually subdued a Velthari hunting drake with nothing but calm words and gentle touches. The implications were staggering. The emergency meeting of the Galactic Construction Oversight Committee was called for less than 18 hours after the hunting drake incident. Representatives from 12 major species gathered in the orbital station above Kepler 442b, their various forms filling the conference chamber with a rainbow of colors, textures, and environmental requirements. Zarathek found herself in the unusual position of being a key witness rather than a simple supervisor. She sat at the curved conference table, surrounded by beings whose authority far exceeded her own. Admiral Kethvar of the Velthari Space Navy, Resonance Prime Mordalix, representing the Crystalline Mordak Collective, and Hive Queen Zektera speaking for the insectoid Hiverack Assembly. Let us review the documented incidents, announced Coordinator Velthex, a tall, elegant Zephyrian whose rainbow-colored feathers indicated his high rank within their diplomatic corps. 3 days ago, human foreman Morrison manually lifted construction materials weighing 800 kilograms each. Yesterday, he positioned a 1,500-kilogram steel truss without mechanical assistance. And today, he subdued a Velthari hunting drake using only physical contact and verbal communication. The coordinator's melodic voice carried undertones of confusion that his translator rendered as worried harmonics. These capabilities are far outside documented human parameters. We need to determine if Morrison represents an anomaly among his species, or if our intelligence about human capabilities has been fundamentally incorrect. Admiral Kethvar leaned forward, his massive frame making the reinforced chair creak ominously. Like all Velthari military officers, he was even larger and more muscular than the civilian cast, with battle scars across his purple scales and cybernetic enhancements that spoke of decades of combat experience. "This is a security issue," he growled, his voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to immediate obedience. "If humans are capable of the feats described, then every strategic assessment we've made about Earth needs to be reconsidered. Their military potential could be vastly underestimated. Or overestimated," chimed Resonance Prime Mordalix, his crystalline form shifting through worried color patterns. Perhaps Morrison has received some form of enhancement that is not readily detectable. Genetic modification, cybernetic implants, exotic technology. Hive Queen Zektera's compound eyes focused on Zarathek with predatory intensity. "You were present for all incidents. Describe exactly what you observed." Zarathek activated her personal recorder and projected holographic displays of her memories onto the conference room's central screen. The other committee members watched in silence as Jake Morrison casually moved construction materials that should have been impossible for his species to handle. When the recordings finished, the chamber remained quiet for several long moments. The strength demonstrations could be explained, Admiral Kethvar admitted reluctantly. Perhaps Earth's gravity is higher than reported, or this particular human has undergone conditioning that enhanced his physical capabilities beyond species norms. But the Drake incident, Resonance Prime Mordalix harmonized nervously. That suggests capabilities we don't understand at all. Velthari hunting drakes are specifically bred and trained to resist mental influence from other species. Their neural structure makes them naturally immune to psychic manipulation, which means Morrison used purely physical presence and vocal communication to achieve what should have required either Velthari genetic compatibility or advanced technology, Hive Queen Zektera concluded. This implies human social and psychological capabilities that are not reflected in our databases. Coordinator Velthex ruffled his feathers thoughtfully. There is one obvious solution. We need to interview Morrison directly and conduct comprehensive testing to determine the true scope of human capabilities. Absolutely not. Admiral Kethvar interrupted sharply. If humans possess unknown capabilities that could affect galactic security, we cannot risk alerting them to our concern. Any investigation must be covert. With respect, Admiral Zarathek interjected, Morrison doesn't seem to think his abilities are unusual. When I questioned him about lifting the beams, he explained it as a natural result of Earth's gravity and his work experience. He may not realize that other species consider his capabilities impossible. The committee members exchanged glances. If the human was unaware that his abilities were extraordinary, it suggested either remarkable ignorance about other species' capabilities or genuine innocence about his own exceptional nature. We need more data, Hive Queen Zectera declared. I propose we assign additional observers to monitor Morrison's activities while conducting discrete background research into human physiology and culture. Agreed. Coordinator Velthex nodded. But we must be subtle. If humans do possess hidden capabilities, we don't want to reveal our investigation until we understand the full scope of what we're dealing with. 3 days later, teams of discrete observers had positioned themselves throughout the construction site, recording every aspect of Jake Morrison's work routine. What they discovered was even more puzzling than the original incidents. Dr. Silix, a renowned xenobiologist from the Aquatic Council, had brought sophisticated scanning equipment to analyze the human's physical structure. Her preliminary report was filled with contradictions and impossibilities. Morrison's muscle density is within normal parameters for his species, she reported during their next committee meeting. His skeletal structure shows no signs of artificial enhancement. His cardiovascular system is consistent with a healthy human male of his age. By every measurement I can take, he is a completely typical member of his species. Then, how do you explain his physical capabilities? Admiral Ketvar demanded. I can't, Dr. Silix admitted. According to my analysis, Morrison should be capable of lifting perhaps 200 kilograms under optimal conditions. Instead, I've now documented him moving loads exceeding 2 tons. The physics don't work. Meanwhile, Dr. Cricksdow, a specialist in interspecies psychology, had been analyzing Morrison's behavior patterns and social interactions. His findings were equally confusing. The human demonstrates remarkable emotional intelligence, Dr. Cricksdow reported. He can read the mood and motivations of alien species with accuracy that rivals trained diplomats. His conflict resolution skills are extraordinary, and his leadership style seems to naturally motivate workers from completely different evolutionary backgrounds. Are you suggesting he has psychic abilities? Resonance Prime Mordalix asked. No, Dr. Kriksdal replied. I detect no psychic emanations, no telepathic activity, no mental influence capabilities. He appears to be achieving these results through purely conventional observation, communication, and behavioral adaptation. The committee was becoming increasingly frustrated. Every test and observation suggested that Jake Morrison was simultaneously a completely normal human and a being with impossible capabilities. That's when the emergency call came in. Code Red Emergency in Section 12. The communication system announced. Structural collapse in progress. Multiple workers trapped under debris. All emergency response teams to Section 12 immediately. The committee members rushed to the observation deck, where they could see the construction site through reinforced transparent aluminum windows. In the distance, Section 12 was hidden behind a cloud of dust and debris. Emergency lights flashed throughout the area, and rescue vehicles were converging from multiple directions. What happened? Coordinator Veltex demanded. Seismic instability, reported the chief engineering officer. An underground fault line shifted unexpectedly. The incomplete foundation supports couldn't handle the stress, and approximately 50 meters of the primary structure collapsed. Through the dust cloud, they could see the extent of the damage. A massive section of the trade center's framework had pancaked downward, creating a chaotic pile of twisted metal and concrete. Somewhere underneath that debris were an unknown number of workers from multiple species. Rescue teams are en route. The engineering officer continued. But accessing the collapse zone will require careful excavation to avoid secondary structural failures. Estimated time to reach potential survivors, 6 to 8 hours. 6 to 8 hours? Dr. Silix gasped. Most species won't survive that long under heavy debris, especially with potential atmosphere leaks and crushing injuries. Admiral Kethvar was already activating his personal communicator. I'm calling in military rescue teams. We have heavy equipment on the orbital station that can... Wait, Zarathek interrupted, pointing toward the collapse zone. Look, through the dust cloud, a figure was approaching the debris pile. Even at this distance, they could recognize Jake Morrison's distinctive work clothes and calm, purposeful stride. He can't be thinking of going in there alone, Coordinator Velthex said in disbelief. The structural instability is too dangerous. One wrong move could trigger another collapse that would bury him along with the trapped workers. But Jake was already at the edge of the debris field, examining the twisted metal and concrete with the same methodical attention he brought to normal construction tasks. He spent several minutes moving around the perimeter, apparently analyzing the collapse pattern and identifying potential weak points. Then he began to dig. The observers watched in fascination as the human foreman started lifting pieces of debris that should have required mechanical assistance. A concrete slab weighing several tons was moved aside as if it were made of lightweight plastic. Steel beams that had been twisted into impossible shapes were straightened and repositioned to create safe passage through the unstable pile. He's not just moving debris, Dr. Cricksdale observed with growing amazement. He's engineering a safe extraction route through structurally unstable material. The mathematical calculations required to determine safe load paths through that chaos should take hours of computer analysis. And he's doing it by visual inspection alone, added Dr. Silix. No scanning equipment, no structural analysis tools, just his own judgment. Within 30 minutes, Jake Morrison had carved a stable tunnel through debris that should have taken heavy machinery hours to clear safely. Emergency teams were finally arriving with proper equipment, but the human foreman was already disappearing into the collapse zone to search for survivors. We need to monitor his progress, Admiral Kethvar declared. Can we get sensor readings from inside the debris field? Negative, the engineering officer replied. Too much interference from the twisted metal and electronic disruption from damaged systems. For the next hour, they could only wait. Emergency teams established a command post at the edge of the collapse zone, but they were reluctant to follow Jake into the unstable structure. The risk of triggering another collapse was too high for normal rescue procedures. Then, figures began emerging from the tunnel Jake had created. First came Clicktor, the Hiverack supervisor who had been working with Jake earlier. The insectoid worker was injured but mobile, carrying a smaller worker who appeared to be unconscious. Behind him came 3 more Hiverack drones, supporting each other as they made their way out of the debris. Next emerged a group of Zephyrian workers, their colorful feathers dulled with dust, but their musical voices raised in what could only be expressions of gratitude. They were followed by a team of Mordak engineers, their crystalline forms cracked, but intact. And finally, Jake Morrison appeared, carrying an unconscious Velthari worker who was at least twice his size and weight. The committee members stared in stunned silence as the human foreman gently deposited the injured worker next to the medical teams, then turned around and headed back into the collapse zone. How many more? Someone called out. 3, maybe 4, Jake replied without stopping. I can hear them calling from the eastern section, but the access route needs some reinforcement before it's safe to bring them out. He disappeared back into the debris tunnel. This is unprecedented. Resonance Prime Mordalix chimed, his crystal form cycling through colors that indicated profound confusion. Morrison has single-handedly accomplished what should require a full rescue team with heavy equipment. And he's doing it while maintaining structural safety standards that our own engineers couldn't calculate without computer assistance. 20 minutes later, Jake emerged with the final group of survivors, 2 injured Mordak engineers and a Zephyrian supervisor who had been trapped in an air pocket deep within the collapsed structure. As medical teams attended to the wounded, Jake Morrison surveyed the debris field one more time, apparently satisfying himself that no one else remained trapped. Then he walked over to the emergency command post and began discussing structural reinforcement procedures to prevent future collapses. Admiral Kethvar turned to his fellow committee members with a grim expression. "Recommendations?" he asked quietly. "We need to completely reassess our understanding of human capabilities," Dr. Silix replied. Morrison just demonstrated physical strength, engineering intuition, and crisis management skills that exceed anything in our databases for his species. More importantly, Dr. Cricksdale added, he did it without any apparent awareness that his actions were extraordinary. To him, this was simply the appropriate response to an emergency situation. Coordinator Velthex ruffled his feathers nervously. If one human can do this, what are entire human populations capable of? We may have seriously underestimated Earth's potential as a galactic power. Or, Zarathek said thoughtfully, maybe we've been measuring the wrong things all along. Down on the construction site, Jake Morrison was already back at work, discussing foundation improvements with the surviving engineers as if rescuing dozens of alien workers from a catastrophic collapse was just another routine task. But word of the rescue was already spreading through galactic communication networks. Military commanders, intelligence analysts, and political leaders across the galaxy were beginning to ask the same question the committee was grappling with. If humans were capable of this much more than anyone had realized, what else might they be hiding? The Galactic Council's emergency session on Kepler 442b brought together representatives from 47 member species, making it one of the largest gatherings in recent galactic history. The massive conference facility had been hastily constructed adjacent to the Trade Center project, its modular design accommodating the diverse environmental requirements of dozens of different life forms. Zarathek found herself in an unprecedented position, serving as the primary witness for events that had apparently shaken the foundations of interspecies relations. She sat at the central testimony platform, facing a semicircular arrangement of delegates whose combined authority governed most of known space. High Chancellor Dexmeron, an ancient and respected Mordax whose crystalline forms sparkled with the wisdom of 3 centuries, called the session to order. "We are here to address disturbing reports about human capabilities that contradict established xenobiological data." His harmonic voice resonated throughout the chamber. These reports suggest either catastrophic intelligence failures or a fundamental misunderstanding of Earth species. Fleet Admiral Thexala of the Velthari Supremacy leaned forward, his massive frame and battle-scarred armor commanding immediate attention. "High Chancellor, with respect, we're not here about misunderstandings. We're here because a single human has demonstrated capabilities that threaten the strategic balance of galactic power." A ripple of concerned communication passed through the assembled delegates. The Velthari had built their galactic influence on their reputation as the galaxy's premier warriors. If humans possessed comparable or superior physical capabilities, it would reshape interstellar politics overnight. "Please proceed with your testimony." High Chancellor Dexmeron directed Zarathek. She activated her personal recording system and projected detailed holographic recreations of her encounters with Jake Morrison. The assembled delegates watched in stunned silence as the human foreman casually performed feats that challenged everything they thought they knew about Earth species. When the recordings ended, the chamber erupted in overlapping discussions as delegates conferred with their advisors and analyzed the implications of what they had witnessed. "Impossible," declared Ambassador Krethek of the Hivrak Collective, his translator struggling to render the chemical complexity of his species' communication. "Humans are registered as Class 7 physical specimens. What these recordings show would require Class 2 or even Class 1 capabilities. The recordings have been verified by our top technical analysts," reported Intelligence Director Velkarin, a Zephyrian whose rainbow plumage indicated high rank within their information services. "No evidence of tampering, no hidden technology, no external enhancement. What you see is what actually occurred. Dr. Alexandra, the galaxy's leading expert on comparative xenobiology, projected detailed anatomical scans onto the chamber's central display. I have conducted extensive analysis of the human Morrison's physical structure. By every measurement available to our science, he is a completely typical member of his species. Muscle density, bone structure, cardiovascular capacity, all within documented human parameters. Then, explain his capabilities, Fleet Admiral Thexala demanded. I cannot, Dr. Alexandra admitted. Either our understanding of human physiology is fundamentally flawed, or Morrison represents some form of enhancement that our instruments cannot detect. Ambassador Kelterix of the Aquatic Council undulated nervously, her bioluminescent patterns flashing with concern. Have we considered the possibility that Morrison is not representative of a species? Perhaps he is an anomaly, a genetic aberration that doesn't reflect general human capabilities. That was my initial assumption, Zarathek replied. But I have since conducted discrete observation of other human personnel on the construction project. While none of them have been tested as extensively as Morrison, they all demonstrate capabilities that exceed documented parameters for their species. She activated additional recordings showing human workers performing tasks that should have required mechanical assistance or multiple personnel. A maintenance technician casually lifting engine components that weighed several hundred kilograms. A structural engineer positioning steel beams with precision that required inhuman strength and balance. These are not anomalies, Zarathek concluded. These appear to be normal capabilities for humans working in manual labor occupations. The chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. If these were typical human capabilities, then every assessment of Earth's potential had been catastrophically wrong. That's when an unexpected voice spoke from the gallery reserved for junior personnel. "Excuse me," said a figure rising from the observer section. "I think I might be able to explain what's happening here." All attention turned to a small, modestly dressed being who was clearly human. He had the same basic physiological characteristics as Morrison: bipedal, pale skin, facial hair, but appeared younger and carried himself with the quiet confidence of an academic rather than a manual laborer. "I am Dr. Marcus Webb, xenobiological attaché to the Human Diplomatic Mission," he said calmly. "I've been listening to this discussion with growing concern about the misconceptions being expressed." High Chancellor Dexmeron's crystalline form shifted through several color patterns before settling on one that indicated cautious interest. "You have permission to address the Council, Dr. Webb." The human walked to a secondary testimony platform, his movements drawing intense scrutiny from delegates who were now viewing his species with new wariness and respect. "The fundamental error in your assessments," Dr. Webb began, "is assuming that all species evolve under uniform conditions. Earth is not a single environment planet like many others in the galaxy." He activated a holographic projection showing Earth's surface in detail. The assembled delegates saw continents spanning from frozen polar regions to scorching deserts, mountain ranges that reached into the thin upper atmosphere, and ocean depths that descended into crushing darkness. "Humans didn't evolve to dominate one specific ecological niche," Dr. Webb continued. "We evolved to survive in all of them. Desert heat, Arctic cold, high altitude, low oxygen, underwater high pressure, extreme weather events that would destroy most stable ecosystems. This explains adaptability," Admiral Thexala interrupted, "but not the strength demonstrations we've witnessed." Dr. Webb smiled slightly. "Admiral, what's the gravity on your homeworld?" "Veldar Prime has gravity 1.7 times galactic standard," the Admiral replied proudly. "It has forged us into the galaxy's strongest warriors." "Earth's gravity is 1.9 times galactic standard," Dr. Webb said quietly. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations and rapid interspecies communication. The Velthari homeworld was legendary for its harsh conditions, and their strength was largely attributed to evolving under high gravity. "If Earth's gravity was even higher, that's impossible," Admiral Thexala protested. The initial contact reports clearly stated, were compiled by diplomatic personnel who met us in space stations and starships with artificial gravity set to galactic standard. Dr. Webb interrupted gently. None of the first contact team ever visited Earth's surface. Dr. Alexandra was rapidly recalculating on her portable computer. If humans evolved under gravity nearly twice galactic standard, that would explain the strength demonstrations, but the implications are significant, Dr. Webb agreed. But there's more. Earth doesn't just have high gravity. It has variable gravity. The holographic display zoomed in to show Earth's varied topography in greater detail. Sea level gravity is 1.9 times standard. Mountain regions can reach 2.1 times standard due to gravitational variation. Ocean floors experience effective gravity exceeding 2.5 times standard when you factor in water pressure. He paused to let the delegates absorb this information. Now, consider that humans regularly travel between these environments. We climb mountains for recreation. We dive to ocean depths for work and pleasure. We build cities at altitudes that would incapacitate most species. Ambassador Kelterix's bioluminescent patterns were flashing rapidly with distress. You're saying that humans routinely experience gravity variations that would kill most other species? Routinely and voluntarily, Dr. Webb confirmed. Jake Morrison, the foreman you've been studying, grew up in the Rocky Mountains of Colorado. The elevation there creates an environment with reduced atmospheric pressure and increased effective gravity. He's been working construction in those conditions since childhood. Dr. Alexandra's voice carried overtones of awe. 20 years of construction work under gravity, approaching 2.5 times standard. His muscle and bone density would adapt far beyond baseline human norms, which are already beyond our assumptions. But this still doesn't explain his interaction with a hunting drake, Hive Queen Zectera interjected. Velthari drakes are specifically engineered to resist mental influence from alien species. Dr. Webb nodded thoughtfully. That brings us to another Earth characteristic that may not be obvious to species from more stable worlds. Earth is a planet in constant crisis. The holographic display shifted to show time-lapse images of natural disasters. Volcanic eruptions, massive storms, earthquakes, floods, droughts, fires, and ice ages. Human civilization has survived multiple extinction-level events. Ice ages that covered most continents, volcanic eruptions that blocked sunlight for years, asteroid impacts, massive floods, climate shifts that destroyed entire ecosystems. How was this relevant to animal handling? Admiral Thexala demanded. Because on Earth, survival often depends on cooperation with other species, Dr. Webb replied. Humans have domesticated hundreds of different animals, from tiny insects to massive predators. We've learned to communicate with, train, and work alongside creatures whose natural instincts should make them incompatible with our species. He activated recordings showing humans working with Earth animals. People riding massive horses, commanding pack-hunting wolves, training enormous bears, and swimming with apex marine predators. This ability to connect with and influence other species isn't mystical or psychic. It's a learned survival skill that humans have been developing for hundreds of thousands of years. The chamber had fallen completely silent. Delegate after delegate was staring at the recordings with expressions ranging from amazement to terror. Dr. Webb, High Chancellor Dex Moran said carefully, "Are you suggesting that humans routinely control apex predators on your homeworld?" Not control, Dr. Webb corrected. Communicate with, understand, and often work alongside. The relationship is usually cooperative rather than dominative. He showed images of humans working with massive Earth predators in construction, agriculture, transportation, and even military applications. Jake Morrison's interaction with the Velthari hunting drake wasn't unusual for someone with his background. He simply applied techniques that humans use every day with dangerous animals on Earth. Fleet Admiral Thexala's voice carried a note of barely controlled alarm. How many humans are there on Earth? Current population is approximately 8 billion, Dr. Webb replied. The silence that followed was deafening. 8 billion beings with capabilities that exceeded the galaxy's premier warrior species. 8 billion potential soldiers, workers, or leaders whose true capabilities had been completely unknown to galactic intelligence services. Dr. Webb, High Chancellor Dex Moran, said very carefully, "Why wasn't this information provided during first contact protocols?" "Because nobody asked," Dr. Webb replied simply. "The first contact team was interested in our technological development, our political structure, and our interest in joining galactic society. They didn't inquire about the physical capabilities of manual laborers or our relationships with domestic animals. And your government didn't think this information was relevant to interstellar relations?" Dr. Webb looked genuinely puzzled. Should have been? Every species brings their own unique capabilities to galactic civilization. We assumed our physical characteristics were already documented during the initial xenobiological assessments. Ambassador Krethek's chemical communications were creating a visible cloud of distress pheromones. The strategic implications. If humans possess military capabilities proportional to what Morrison has demonstrated. "Oh, we really don't," Dr. Webb interrupted quickly. "Jake Morrison is a construction foreman with decades of experience in manual labor under extreme conditions. Most humans work in climate-controlled environments using advanced technology. Our military personnel receive specialized training, but they're not representative of general population capabilities." The relief in the chamber was palpable but short-lived. However, Dr. Webb continued thoughtfully, if the galactic community were ever threatened by a crisis requiring manual labor, construction work, emergency rescue, animal handling, or survival under extreme conditions, well, humans do have extensive experience with those types of challenges. As the implications of this statement sank in, delegates began to realize that their understanding of not just humans, but of the entire galactic balance of power needed to be completely reconsidered. And somewhere on the surface below, Jake Morrison was continuing his quiet, efficient work, completely unaware that his normal daily routine had just changed the course of galactic history. 6 months after the Galactic Council's emergency session, the completed trade center on Kepler, 442b, had become something far more significant than anyone originally intended. What began as a commercial project had transformed into an informal embassy for human-alien cooperation, attracting visitors from across the galaxy who wanted to see the legendary construction site where a single human foreman had changed interstellar relations forever. Zarathek stood on the observation deck of the Trade Center's highest tower, looking out over a construction site that barely resembled the chaotic work zone where she had first encountered Jake Morrison. The original project had been completed 3 months ahead of schedule, thanks largely to innovative construction techniques that human workers had introduced. But rather than shutting down, the site had become a permanent testing ground for human-alien collaboration. Below, she could see dozens of mixed-species work crews tackling increasingly ambitious projects. The Galactic Council had authorized construction of an advanced research facility, a diplomatic training center, and a cultural exchange complex. Each project served as an opportunity for different species to work alongside humans and learn from their unique approaches to problem-solving. "Quite a change from our first meeting," said a familiar voice behind her. Zarathek turned to see Jake Morrison approaching, wearing the same simple work clothes he'd had on that first day. The only difference was a small pin on his collar indicating his new position as Director of Human-Alien Cooperative Construction, a title the Galactic Council had created specifically for him. "Indeed," Zarathek replied, "though I'm not sure I entirely understand what happened." Jake joined her at the observation window, following her gaze to the bustling activity below. "What do you mean?" "I mean that 6 months ago, I was convinced that humans were weak, primitive creatures who had no business in positions of authority. Now I'm working as your liaison to the Veltheri construction crews, and somehow this feels completely natural." Jake chuckled. "People change their minds when they get new information. That's not mysterious." "But it's more than that," Zarathek insisted. "Watch." She pointed to a work area where a mixed crew of Veltheri, Hivrak, and humans were installing the foundation for the new research facility. The Velthari workers, supposedly the galaxy's most prideful and dominant species, were taking direction from a human supervisor who couldn't have been more than 25 years old. 6 months ago, that would have been impossible, Zarathek observed. Velthari warriors don't accept leadership from species they consider inferior. Yet there they are, working seamlessly under human coordination. Maybe the problem wasn't about superiority, Jake suggested. Maybe it was about communication. Before Zarathek could respond, an emergency alarm echoed across the construction site. Both turned to see what was happening in the research facility area, where workers were evacuating rapidly from what appeared to be a structural emergency. Foundation collapse in progress, announced the site-wide communication system. All personnel evacuate Sector 7 immediately. Jake was already moving toward the emergency, with Zarathek close behind. As they reached the evacuation area, they could see the problem. The massive foundation slab for the research facility was tilting and cracking, apparently undermined by an unexpected underground water source that had destabilized the soil. "How bad is it?" Jake asked Captain Thexlar, who was coordinating the emergency response. "Catastrophic," the Craxi security chief replied grimly. "The foundation weighs approximately 50,000 tons. If it collapses completely, it could destabilize the entire underground utility network for the trade center." Zarathek studied the tilting foundation slab. It was enormous, easily the size of a city block and several meters thick. The reinforced concrete and steel structure represented months of work by hundreds of specialists. "Evacuation is proceeding smoothly," Captain Thexlar continued, "but we need heavy equipment from the orbital station to stabilize the foundation. Estimated arrival time for adequate machinery is 6 hours. 6 hours? Jake frowned. That foundation won't stay stable for 6 hours. We need to do something now. He walked closer to the failing structure, studying the crack patterns and tilt angle with the same methodical attention he brought to normal construction problems. "Jake," Zarathek said carefully, "that's 50,000 tons of concrete and steel. Even you can't." "You're right," Jake agreed. "I can't handle that kind of load by myself." He activated his personal communicator and sent a priority message across all human personnel channels. "Attention, all human workers. We have a foundation emergency in Sector 7. I need every human on the site to report for emergency stabilization efforts." This is not a drill. Within minutes, humans began arriving from across the construction site. Zarathek watched in fascination as workers abandoned their normal duties to respond to Jake's call. They came from every section: electricians, plumbers, structural engineers, equipment operators, safety supervisors, and administrative personnel. "What can we do?" asked Sarah Chun, a young structural engineer who had recently arrived from Earth. "We need to physically support the foundation while engineering teams install permanent stabilization," Jake replied. "It's going to require coordinated lifting on a scale we've never attempted before." Dr. Marcus Webb, who had become a permanent resident of the complex after the Galactic Council hearings, approached with a worried expression. "Jake, the math doesn't work. Even with every human on the site, we're talking about maybe 60 people trying to support 50,000 tons. That's roughly 800 tons per person. Under Earth gravity," Jake replied calmly. "Here on Kepler 442b, it's about 400 tons effective weight per person." "That's still impossible," Dr. Webb protested. "Is it?" Jake asked. "Remember the ancient Earth legends about humans performing impossible feats when lives were at stake? Maybe they weren't as mythical as we thought." By now, word of the emergency had spread throughout the Trade Center complex. Alien workers and visitors had gathered at a safe distance to watch the humans' response to the crisis. Many seemed skeptical that any number of humans could make a difference against such massive structural forces. "Positions everyone," Jay called out, directing the assembled humans to specific points around the failing foundation. "We're going to work as a coordinated unit. When I give the signal, everyone lifts together and holds position until the engineering teams can install support pillars." Zarathek moved closer, unable to believe what she was witnessing. 60 humans, none of them appearing particularly imposing compared to other galactic species, were positioning themselves to attempt something that should require massive mechanical equipment. Structural analysis complete, reported Mordax, the crystalline engineer who had become Jake's regular technical advisor. If the humans can maintain lift pressure for approximately 20 minutes, we can install sufficient support pillars to stabilize the foundation permanently. 20 minutes, Jake nodded. Everyone ready? The assembled humans confirmed their readiness with quiet efficiency. No dramatic speeches, no emotional preparation, just professional workers preparing to tackle an engineering problem. Lift in 3, 2, 1 now. What happened next would be remembered throughout galactic history as the moment when human capabilities were truly understood for the first time. 60 humans, working in perfect coordination, lifted a 50,000-ton foundation slab and held it stable while alien engineering teams installed permanent supports underneath. The watching crowd of alien observers stood in stunned silence as the humans maintained their positions without apparent strain, discussing the situation calmly while supporting loads that should have been impossible for biological entities to manage. Structural integrity holding, reported Mordax, his crystalline form cycling through colors of amazement. Installing support pillar 1 complete. Support pillar 2 complete. For 23 minutes, the humans held their positions while the engineering teams worked with desperate efficiency to install the stabilization system. When the final support pillar was secured and the foundation declared stable, the humans simply lowered their load and returned to their normal duties as if nothing unusual had happened. But everything had changed. Admiral Kethvar of the Veltheri Space Navy, who had been visiting the complex to observe human work methods, approached Jake with an expression of profound respect. "Morrison," he said formally, "I owe you and your species an apology. I have commanded warriors across a dozen star systems, but I have never witnessed anything comparable to what just occurred." "It was just a construction emergency," Jake replied modestly. "We do what needs to be done." "No, Admiral Kethvar Choretset. That was a demonstration of capabilities that transcend individual strength. Your species doesn't just possess physical power. You possess the ability to coordinate that power in ways that achieve results beyond what should be mathematically possible." Dr. Webb was frantically taking measurements and notes. The load distribution, the coordination, timing, the sustained effort. None of this fits standard biological parameters for any known species. "Maybe," Zarathek said thoughtfully, "we've been measuring the wrong things all along." Over the following weeks, as news of the Foundation rescue spread throughout galactic communication networks, a new understanding of humanity began to emerge. Not as individually superior beings, but as a species whose greatest strength lay in their ability to work together to achieve impossible results. Research teams from dozens of species arrived to study human coordination techniques. Military strategists sought to understand how human units could accomplish objectives that should require much larger forces. Engineers wanted to learn construction methods that seemed to defy conventional limitations. But